We begin by exploring a delicate yet critical conversation unfolding between the United States and Canada, all centered on one of the most urgent crises facing both countries today, fentanyl trafficking. This isn't a debate about trade deals or tariffs, though economics is in the background. It's about the flow of a deadly synthetic opioid that is tearing communities apart and demanding an unprecedented level of cross-border cooperation. On one side, the U.S. is struggling with staggering overdose numbers, fentanyl linked to hundreds of thousands of lives lost in recent years. In response, the Biden and Trump administrations alike have elevated the issue into national security talk, framing it as a joint challenge that hinges on disrupting supply chains, tightening borders, and mending global drug networks. That public alarm pushed the U.S. to ramp up pressure on partners, including Canada, insisting that Canadian efforts must match the scale of the threat. Canada, for its part, appointed a fentanyl czar named Kevin Brasso to spearhead internal reforms, border vigilance, and bilateral collaboration. When Canadian officials, including Justice Minister Sean Fraser, Public Safety Minister Gary Anandasangari, and Brasso himself, met with U.S. Attorney General Pam Bondi recently, the tone was sober but the stakes were unmistakable. The sources describe the meeting as warm and collegial, but the subtext is clear: the Americans want proof that Canada is doing more than talk. To understand the friction, we need to unpack the layers. From the U.S. perspective, fentanyl is pouring in from Mexican cartels, from synthetic labs, even from precursors shipped from China. President Trump has repeatedly cited the fentanyl crisis to justify steep tariffs on Canadian goods, first 25%, now increased to 35%, arguing that Canada is not doing enough to halt the flow of the drug over the northern border. He even declared a national emergency, invoked trade laws, and leveraged economic pressure to compel action. Canada fired back, countering tariffs, but also doubling down domestically. The Trudeau government allocated $1.3 billion to upgrade border infrastructure, surveillance, and joint law enforcement tools. And Brasso has been coordinating cross-department efforts, liaising with U.S. counterparts, sharing intelligence, and emphasizing that the solution must unite supply-side border enforcement with demand-side public health measures. Education, treatment, prevention. One without the other won't hold. But here's the pivot. Recent research from Carnegie Mellon's Heinz College casts doubt on whether the northern border is really fueling the crisis at scale. Their analysis of fentanyl seizures across U.S. counties compared to population impact found that southern border regions saw enormous seizures relative to their population share, while northern border regions accounted for only a small fraction of seizures. That suggests a mismatch. The crisis is serious, but Canada may not be the main entry point as portrayed by tariffs. This evidence urges policymakers to base decisions on data, not rhetoric. So you have competing narratives colliding. The U.S. insists on tougher measures. Canada responds with new leadership, funding, and coordination. Meanwhile, analysts suggest the threat might be mischaracterized, and that south of the border pathways warrant even stronger focus. Beyond policy, the context includes transnational organized crime adapting fast. DIA operations have uncovered international cartels like the Kinahan Group diversifying into fentanyl precursors, routing chemicals from China into North America via Canada. These networks exploit courier routes, shipping companies, even family-run trucking businesses to move precursor chemicals across borders. That global dimension stretches the fight beyond bilateral diplomacy into international policing, financial monitoring, cargo screening, and intelligence sharing. On the enforcement side, U.S. agencies like Customs and Border Protection have rolled out major operations: Operation Plaza Spike, Operation Apollo, Artemis, Hourglass, targeting fentanyl smuggling across land, sea, and air. Many of these operations focus on southwestern corridors and maritime ports, reflecting where seizures are highest. Canada has joined some of these through joint task forces, but the bulk of U.S. resources remain directed south. Their shared ambition, however, is to build stronger operational coordination, integrated alerts, streamlined information sharing, harmonized border inspections, canine units, advanced scanning systems, shared data analytics, and synchronized law enforcement responses. Canada also emphasizes harm reduction, awareness drives, community programs, and funding for addiction treatment. Brasso emphasizes the dual strategy: stop the supply while healing the demand. The talks themselves amount to more than diplomatic gestures. They're a test of how two neighboring rivals can unite around a shared crisis. Fentanyl has blurred the lines between public health, homeland security, and trade. The rhetoric includes increased tariffs and national emergency declarations, but the path forward must rely on evidence, cooperation, and a shared sense of responsibility. When President Trump called Prime Minister Trudeau for a 50-minute discussion, trade and fentanyl were front and center. Officials on both sides signaled willingness to continue dialogues. U.S. Commerce Secretary, the Vice President, and Canadian Trade and Safety Ministers have all been engaged. Although the tone leans toward tension tariffs, economic leverage, the underlying goal remains the same: stem the tide of death sweeping through both nations. In this dynamic exchange, the unique strengths of each country can build synergies: Canada's porous but regulated land border, its public health frameworks, and willingness to mobilize billions toward enhanced infrastructure, and the U.S.'s robust law enforcement apparatus, detection technologies, and geopolitical influence. Yet, the brakes must come off long-term cooperation. Political cycles toss shifts in strategy and tone. Tariffs create trade upheaval, hurting businesses and workers. Public pressure mounts as overdose rates keep mounting. Behind closed doors, officials know that only sustained collaboration, smart, compassionate, and data-driven, can save lives. So if your video review is exploring the conversation, this is where you dwell: the US using trade policy as leverage, Canada stepping up with a central commissioner and new investments, emerging evidence pushing for smarter targeting, shared recognition that the crisis transcends borders, and that human lives are on the line. Let us understand the gravity at the granular level. A tiny dosage of fentanyl, just a few grains, can kill. In 2025 alone, the DEA reports over 232 million lethal doses seized in the US. That's staggering, a quantity unimaginable. And though Canada is a major neighbor, only a sliver of their production contributes to US flows. Data-driven targeting is essential. Meanwhile, public health professionals warn that interventions must go beyond enforcement. Treatment access, harm reduction, safe supply measures, education, and community resilience are just as vital. Canadian and US agencies have been sharing best practices, joint awareness campaigns, and coordinated law enforcement support. Going forward, the stakes are clear: each overdose is a failure of policy, prevention, and urgency. The U.S. Canada talks are about aligning attention, funding, and strategy, not just narrowing the supply chain, but supporting communities and saving lives. In this video, we explore the players, the moves, the data revelations, the risks, and the human toll behind the headlines. Let us bring clarity to complexity.